Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the snow-covered corridors of 18th century St. Petersburg, where the sound of a newborn's cry echoes through the Winter Palace for what seems like the 100th time in just over 2 decades. Picture this. Anna Leopoldovna, barely 25 years old, lies exhausted in her gilded birthing chamber. While court physicians debate whether her body can survive another pregnancy, she's already given birth to more children than most women could imagine. And yet the Russian succession crisis demands that she continue producing heirs with the mechanical reliability of a factory assembly line. The year is 1740 and Anna has just delivered her 37th child, a daughter who will live barely 6 months before joining the growing cemetery of imperial infants who couldn't survive the brutal realities. So, if you're into strange and fascinating tales from history, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Anna Leopoldovna's transformation from minor German princess into Russia's most prolific imperial breeding machine began with a marriage contract that treated her reproductive capacity as a strategic resource rather than a personal attribute. Born in 1718 as Elizabeth, the kind of impeccable German royal bloodline that made her valuable, she possessed the kind of impeccable German royal bloodline that made her valuable, she Empress Anna. The marriage negotiations between the Russian and German courts read more like livestock breeding agreements than royal diplomatic correspondence, with detailed discussions about Anna Leopoldovna's fertility potential, her family's reproductive history, and her physical suitability for intensive childbearing. Governance 1733 was arranged specifically to produce a generation of Russian heirs who could combine Romanov legitimacy with the Yashin. The wedding ceremony in 1739 included elaborate rituals designed to bless the union's reproductive potential, with Orthodox priests offering special prayers for fertility, while German Lutheran ministers added their own benedictions for numerous healthy offers. Anna Leopoldovna's wedding night wasn't just a private moment between newlyweds, Ravadingus. Within months of her marriage, Anna Leopoldovna was pregnant with her first child, beginning a reproductive marathon that would continue virtually without interruption for the next 27 years. The birth of Ivan VI in 1740 marked not just the arrival of Anna's first child, but the beginning of a palace conspiracy that would use her fertility as a weapon in the ongoing struggle for Russian imperial power. Empress Anna Ivanovna immediately declared the infant Ivan her official heir, bypassing other potential successors and making Anna Leopoldovna's reproductive capacity the foundation of Russian political stability. This decision transformed Anna from a new mother enjoying her first child into a state asset. The pressure to produce additional heirs intensified dramatically after Empress Anna Ivanovna's death in 1740, leaving infant Ivan VI as nominal ruler, with Anna Leopoldovna serving as regent and expected to continue bearing children who could secure the dynasty's future. Court physicians began monitoring Anna's reproductive. The transformation of motherhood into a political necessity meant that Anna's personal desires, physical comfort, and emotional well-being became secondary considerations compared to the state's need for a steady supply of legitimate Romanov heirs. Her daily routine was restructured around opating her fertility, with court nutritionists designing special diets. The birth of her second child, Catherine, in 1741, confirmed Anna's value as an imperial baby factory and intensified the palace intrigue surrounding her continued fertility. Various court factions began calculating how many additional children Anna might produce. Her letters from this period reveal a young woman who seemed to view pregnancy as her primary duty and source of value, suggesting that she had internalized the court's perspective on her role as an imperial breeding machine. The irony of Anna's situation was that her remarkable fertility, which should have guaranteed her security and status, actually made her increasingly vulnerable to political manipulation by courtiers who saw her children as chess pieces in their own games for power. Each new pregnancy brought fresh speculation about succession planning, inheritance rights, and the future balance of power between various noble families who hoped to benefit from their connections to Anna's growing brood of imperial offspring. By 1742, Anna Leopoldovna had established herself as the most fertile woman in Russian imperial history, but her reproductive success was already beginning to attract the kind of political attention that would alter history. The woman who had been valued for her ability to produce heirs was about to discover that in 18th century Russian politics, even successful motherhood offered no protection against the ambitions of those who saw children as weapons and wombs as battlefields in the eternal struggle for imperial control. The court physicians who descended upon Anna Leopoldovna's daily life transformed pregnancy from a natural biological process into a carefully orchestrated scientific experiment designed to maximize both the quantity and quality of imperial offspring. Dr. K's day each morning began with what court records euphemistically termed the constitutional examination, during which Dr. Lestyuk documented Anna's temperature, pulse, complexion, and physical symptoms while searching for the earliest possible signs of pregnancy or optimal conception timing. The physician's daily reports to the Imperial Council included detailed analysis of Anna's reproductive status, complete with predictions about her fertility. Anna's diet was completely redesigned according to 18th century theories about foods that enhanced fertility, with court nutritionists prescribing specific combinations of oysters, figs, honey, and various herbal preparations believed to optimize her reproductive capacity. The imperial kitchen maintained separate cooking facilities expensively for Anna's fertility-enhancing meals, with specialized cooks trained in preparing dishes according to medical prescriptions. Rather than palatability, Dr. Lestyuk consulted with fertility experts across Europe, incorporating theories from French, Italian, and English physicians into a comprehensive reproductive management system that treated Anna's body as a precision instrument requiring constant calibration. The court maintained detailed correspondence with Federation N. These international medical consultations created a network of European physicians who were all invested in the success of Anna's reproductive program, turning her pregnancy into a collaborative scientific project that extended far beyond the Russian court. Anna's daily schedule, called reproductive optimization protocols, with specific times allocated for rest, exercise, social interaction, and intimate relations based on county. The court established mandatory rest periods during which Anna was required to lie in specific positions believed to enhance conception, effectively transforming her leisure time into medically supervised fertility treatments. Her exercise regimen was carefully designed to strengthen her reproductive system while avoiding any activities that might interfere with conception or pregnancy. With court physicians monitoring her fitness, the supervision extended to Anna's emotional life, with court psychologists. Sachs' remarkably advanced concept for the 1740s providing counseling, designed to maintain the psychological conditions believed most conducive to successful reproduction. Scholars debate whether this early form of psychological support actually helped Anna cope with the pressure of constant pregnancy, or whether it simply represented an form of state contrafort. Ava helped Anna cope with the pressure of constant. Anna's wardrobe was redesigned according to medical specifications, with specially constructed corsets and gowns that could accommodate rapid physical changes while providing what physicians believed was optimal support for her reproductive organs. During various stages of pregnancy, the court employed teams of seamstresses who specialized Anna's frequently changing body while maintaining the ceremonial requirements of imperial court dress. Dr. Lestyuk's management system included detailed protocols for sexual relations between Anna and Prince Anton Ulrich, with the physician providing specific instructions about timing, frequency, and even techniques believed to maximize the likelihood of conception. These intimate instructions were documented in medical records that survive in Russian state archives, providing modern historians with uncomfortably detailed. They called the Katchennet the sexual lives of 18th century royalty. The court established what were essentially fertility clinics within the palace complex, complete with specialized examination rooms, medical equipment, and treatment facilities designed specifically for managing Anna's reproductive health. These medical facilities included early versions of gynecological examination. Dr. Lestyuk's treatment protocols included regular internal examinations, herbal douches, and various mechanical interventions that would be considered inappropriate by modern medical standards but represented cutting-edge reproductive medicine in the 18th century. The physician maintained detailed anatomical drawings in doctor's changes in Anna's body throughout multiple pregnancies, dating a symmeist Anna's prenature. Anna's pregnancies were managed according to strict medical schedules that dictated everything from her sleeping position to her daily fluid intake, with court physicians treating her body as a complex machine requiring constant adjustment and monitoring. The birth process itself was transformed. In a birth proj, balzat at tray fall. Each birth was followed by detailed post-pregnancy examinations designed to assess Anna's physical condition and determine how quickly she could safely attempt another conception, with recovery periods calculated according to medical theories rather than her personal comfort or desires. Dr. Lestu's recovery time. To schedule that Anna's average recovery time between pregnancies was approximately 6 months. The systematic nature of Anna's reproductive management created a template that would be adopted by other European courts, making her experience a model for how royal women's bodies could be medically operated for dynastic purposes. Yet despite all the scientific precision and medical supervision, Anna's pregnant success rate remained subject to the biological realities of infant mortality and maternal health composition. The gap between medical ambition and biological reality would soon become apparent as Anna's body began showing signs of wear from the relentless demands of constant pregnancy and childbirth, under the most intensive medical supervision in European royal history. By 1743, Anna Leopoldovna's body had begun to rebel against the relentless demands of imperial reproduction, with each pregnancy taking a progressively heavier toll on her physical health and mental stability. The birth of her 15th child, Princess Antonia, in March 1743, was accompanied bedridden, that court physicians viewed as an unacceptable delay in the reproductive schedule, rather than a nescence viewed as an unaccompanied. Dr. Lestu's medical records from this period document alarming changes in Anna's physical condition, including chronic anemia, recurring infections, and what he described as general constitutional weakness, resulting from years of continuous pregnancy and childbirth. The court physician's reports to the Imperial Council revealed growing concern about Anna's ability. Anna's letters to her sister during 1743 provide heartbreaking insight into her physical suffering, describing constant pain, exhaustion, and a growing sense that her body had become a stranger to her mechanism that produced children but no longer felt like her own. The psychological toll of constant pregnancy became evident in reports from court observers who noted Anna's increased sense of cold of constant pregnancy. Palace records indicate that Anna often struggled to remember the names and birth dates of her younger children, a detail that court officials attributed to the mental strain of managing an impossibly large family rather than any fundality rate among Anna's children reached devastating levels by the mid-1740s, with nearly half of her pregnancies resulting in children who died before their first birthday due to a cauldron. Death of pregnancy. Each child's death created fresh trauma for Anna, while simultaneously increasing pressure from court officials who demanded that she compensate for these losses by producing additional heirs as quickly as possible. The palace nurseries had evolved into something resembling a medieval orphanage, with teams of wet nurses, governesses, and medical attendants managing dozens of imperial children, while Anna herself remained largely isolated in her reproductive chambers, perpetually pregnant. Scholars debate whether Anna's emotional distance from her children represented a psychological defense mechanism against the pain of frequent infant deaths, or whether the sheer physical demands of constant pregnancy had simply overwhelmed her capacity for individual relationships. The children who survived infancy found themselves treated more as political tempters, for himself treated more as Palatiums. Prince Ivan VI, Anna's first child and nominal ruler of Russia, had become a virtual prisoner in his own palace by age 4, surrounded by guards and advisors who viewed him as a threat to be managed rather than a child to be nurtured. The political manipulation of Anna's children and controlling access to the imperial offspring was more valuable than controlling Anna herself, since she was increasingly viewed as merely the production mechanism for the real sources of power. Anna's pregnancy with her 23rd child in 1744 nearly killed her. with court physicians documenting life-threatening complications that included severe bleeding, infection, and what modern medicine would recognize as symptoms of complete physical exhaustion. The stillbirth of this child marked a turning point in Palace attitudes toward Anna's reproductive program, with some court officials beginning to question whether the human cost of constant pregnancy. Dr. Leschik's medical journals from this period reveal his growing alarm about Anna's physical condition, noting that her body showed signs of premature aging, chronic illness, and what he described as reproductive system failure that threatened her survival. The physician's private correspondence with medical colleagues across Europe sought advice about managing the health of a woman whose reproductive organs forced Europe. Anna's daily routine had become a nightmare cycle: pregnancy, childbirth, brief recovery, and immediate return to conception. Attempts, with court officials treating any delay in this process as potential treason against imperial succession requirements. Her living quarters were redesigned to function essentially as a medical facility, with constant supervision by physicians, midwives, and court officials who monitored a prisoner. The transformation of Anna from a person into a reproductive mechanism became complete during this period, with court records referring to her almost exclusively in terms of her fertility status, pregnancy progress, and expected delivery dates, rather than her personal thoughts, feelings, or desires. The children born during Anna's later pregnancies showed increasing signs of physical and developmental. Palace physicians began recommending shorter intervals between pregnancies, arguing that rapid conception might prevent some of the health complications that developed during longer recovery periods, essentially doubling down on the reproductive program, despite clear evidence of its destructive effects. Anna's correspondence from 1745 reveals a woman who had begun to view pregnancy and childbirth as forms of torture rather than natural biological processes. The court's response to Anna's deteriorating condition was to increase medical supervision and implement more aggressive fertility treatments, approaching her reproductive failure as an engineering problem that could be solved through better management rather than recognizing the fundamental unpartmented somehow analyriking twesen. The irony that her remarkable fertility had ultimately become the source of her physical destruction was lost on court officials, who continued planning for additional pregnancies, while Anna's body began the slow process of biological rebellion that would soon make continued reproduction impossible. The Palace Coup that erupted in November 1741 transformed Anna Leopoldovna's role from imperial baby producer into the most dangerous woman in Russia, as her fertility suddenly became a weapon that rival factions could use to legitimize their claims to power. Elizabeth Petrovna's seizure of the throne didn't just overthrow the existing government, it didn't just trody to Palestine gov the Rachel idea. The coup began at midnight with Elizabeth's guards surrounding the nurseries where Anna's children slept, effectively taking the imperial offspring hostage while their mother lay in her chambers, 8 months pregnant with what would become her 31st child. Elizabeth understood instinctively that controlling Anna's reproductive future was more important than simply removing her from power, since any additional children could become rallying points. The new empress's first decree following the coup included specific provisions for managing Anna's ongoing pregnancy, with court physicians ordered to ensure that the birth proceeded normally, while preventing any possibility that the child could be used for political purposes. Anna's labor pains began just 3 days after Elizabeth's coup, creating the surreal situation. While at a house arrest, surrounded by guards loyal to the usurped regent giving birth to coup, creating Xenomil. The birth of Prince Peter in December 1741 marked the beginning of a new phase in Anna's story, where her continued fertility became a source of political liability rather than dynastic strength. As Elizabeth's regime struggled with what to do about a woman who could potentially produce endless threat, the solution that emerged was perhaps more cruel than outright elimination. Anna would be allowed to continue bearing children, but those children would be systematically removed from any possibility of political influence, essentially turning her fertility into a form of slow-motion execution. Each new pregnancy became a political crisis for Elizabeth's regime, requiring careful management to ensure that the births didn't inspire loyalist uprisings. Anna's 32nd child, born in 1742, was immediately separated from her and placed in a monastery, beginning a pattern that would continue for the remainder of her reproductive years. Children born into immediate exile with no possibility of ever knowing their mother, or claiming their royal heritage, the psychological torture of bearing children only to have them immediately taken away, destroyed as remaining in mechanism with court observe them immediately taken away, destroyed Anna's remamata. Elizabeth's advisors developed increasingly sophisticated methods for neutralizing the political threat posed by Anna's fertility, including fake death announcements for some of her children and elaborate deception campaigns designed to convince potential rebels that the imperial bloodline had been completely eliminated. The irony wasn't lost on court observers that Anna's remise to motor the most dangerous, requiring constant surveillance. Scholars continue to debate whether Elizabeth's decision to allow Anna to continue bearing children while eliminating their political potential represented unusual mercy or calculated cruelty, with some historians arguing that immediate execution would have been more humane than the slow destruction of Mertum of Tetu Petu. The birth of her 35th child in 1743 coincided with reports of a planned rebellion aimed at restoring Anna to power, forcing Elizabeth's regime to implement even more restrictive controls over the deposed regent's reproductive activities. Court physicians were ordered to monitor Anna's pregnancies, credence, torbitus, nundum. The management of Anna's later pregnancies became a form of state-podate terrorism, with court officials using her maternal instincts as leverage to ensure her compliance with political restrictions, while simultaneously punishing her for the crime of having been too successful at her original reproductive means. The systematic elimination of Anna's children from public knowledge created a bizarre situation where Russia's most prolific mother was treated as if she were childless, with court records deliberately obscuring the true number of her offspring to prevent accurate counts that might inspire rebellion. Elizabeth's regime developed elaborate protocols, staged funeral ceremonies for the living children, and complex deception operations did scrutinize protocols for manjibus. The transformation of motherhood into political warfare reached its logical conclusion when Anna began to suspect that some of her supposedly dead children were actually alive, leading to desperate attempts to gather information about their whereabouts that were treated as treasonous activities by Elizabeth Succeedus. The woman who had once been celebrated for producing imperial heirs now found herself cursed with a reproductive capacity that had become a weapon used against her, as each new child represented another opportunity for her enemies to demonstrate their power through the systematic destruction. Anna's fertility had been transformed from the foundation of dynastic stability into the instrument of her own political and politics, even the most successful, while wielded by sufficient ruse. The final pregnancies of Anna Leopoldovna's reproductive marathon coincided with Elizabeth's growing paranoia about any surviving heirs who might threaten her increasingly unstable reign, transforming Anna's continued fertility from a manageable protocol, Premange tendi untaindrade. Dr. Lestrick's final medical reports paint a horrifying picture of a woman whose reproductive system had been pushed far beyond human biological limits, describing Anna as a walking medical catastrophe whose continued survival defies both scientific and dandics. The physician's private correspondent reveals his growing alarm that Anna's body was beginning to produce delamentum damage, that Anna's body was beginning to prompt weak gainy and defating, with her final children shedding to parading resfine. Anna's 39 pregnancy in 1746 nearly killed her during a labor that lasted 4 days, with court physicians working frantically to save her life while Elizabeth's advisors debated whether her death might actually solve their political problems more effectively than her continued survival. The child born from this nightmarish delivery was so severely deformed that even court physicians accustomed to medical in impacebit comfort the royal bloodline were excessively deformed, that even court physicians succumbed to mirth. Elizabeth's response to Anna's deteriorating reproductive capacity was to increase rather than decrease the pressure for additional pregnancies, apparently believing that quantity could compensate for the declining quality of the imperial offspring being produced. The empress ordered court physicians to implement what they called emergency reproductive protocols, involving exploring Anna's fertility to its earlier levels, despite clear evidence that her body could no longer sustain normal pregnancies. These treatments included crude hormone therapies, using animal extracts, mechanical interventions that bordered on torture, and various chemical preparations that modern medicine would recognize as extremely dangerous to both maternal and fetal health. Anna's letters from this period reveal a woman who had begun to welcome the possibility of death during childbirth, viewing each labor as a potential escape from the biological prison that her fertility had created. The birth of her 40th child in 1747 was accompanied by severe hemorrhaging that left Anna unconscious for 3 days, during which time court officials seriously considered announcing her death and eliminating the political complications associated with her continued existence. Her miraculous recompense. Scholars debate whether Anna's survival of increasingly dangerous pregnancies represented remarkable physical resilience or whether court physicians had developed medical techniques that artificially prolonged her reproductive capacity beyond normal biological limits. The 41st pregnancy in 1748 produced twins who both died within hours of birth, marking the beginning of what court records describe as the finest reproductive phase, during which Anna's body began puberty. Elizabeth's advisors recognized that Anna's declining fertility represented both an opportunity and a problem. While fewer successful pregnancies meant fewer political threats, Anna's survival meant that she could potentially recover and resume producing viable. The solution that emerged was characteristic cruel. Anna would be allowed to continue attempting pregnancies, while court physicians secretly administered treatments recalmed this time. These covert medical interventions included substances that induced miscarriages, procedures that damaged fetal development, and medications that weakened Anna's immune system to increase the likelihood of pregnancy complications. The 42nd pregnancy in 1749 ended in a miscarriage that Anna privately suspected had been deliberately induced, leading to her desperate attempt to communicate with her body. Her growing awareness that her pregnancy failures were being artificially induced transformed Anna's final reproductive years into a nightmare of paranoia and helplessness. As she realized that even her own body had become a weapon being used against her by Elizabeth's regime, the birth of her 43rd child in 1750 was the last successful delivery of Anna's reproductive career, producing a daughter who was immediate the infant had been born alive and healthy. Anna's final pregnancy in 1751 ended in complications that were almost certainly induced by court physicians who had decided that eliminating her reproductive capacity permanently was the only way to neutralize the political threat she represented. The medical procedures that ended Anna's fertility were delivery time to appear natural, involving what court records describe as surgical complications during routine delivery assistance. The irony of Anna's final years was that the loss of her reproductive capacity, which should have brought relief from decades of biological exploitation, actually sealed her fate by eliminating the only thing that had made her valuable enough to keep alive. Elizabeth's regime for tolerated Anna's existence. Once that fertility was eliminated, required came nothing more than a dangerous wave. The woman who had given birth to 44 children in 27 years died in 1752, not from the complications of childbirth that had nearly killed her so many times, but from what court records euphemistically describe as sudden illness the modern historians recognize as almost certainly delovnit. The final tragedy of Anna's story was that her remarkable fertility, which had made her valuable to one regime and dangerous to another, ultimately proved that in 18th century Russian politics, even the most successful biological functions of political power, the imperial baby factory, had finally broken down, taking with it the woman whose body had been transformed to a machine for producing heirs, leaving behind only scattered records of a reproduction tonight. As you settle into the gentle embrace of sleep, let the harsh realities of Anna's story fade into the softer shadows of historical memory, where her suffering becomes part of the larger tapestry of human experience rather than an immediate source of pain. Think instead of the quiet strength that allowed her to endure 27 years of dignity. Let your dreams carry you to places where women's bodies belong to themselves, rather than to political systems that view fertility as a strategic resource to be managed and exploited for dynastic purposes. Sate peacefully, knowing that the brutal machinery of imperial reproduction has crumbled into historical dust, leaving only the gentle whisper, the pages turning in archives, where Anna's story waits to be remembered with compassion rather than calculated rest. Well, while the night settles around you like a protective blanket, shielding your dreams from the harsh realities of ages past, where even motherhood could become a form of political slavery that destroyed the very women it claimed to honor. Cone your eyes and let the darkness carry away these difficult truths, leaving only the soft sound of your own breathing and the peaceful knowledge that Anna's long suffering